I've been a fan of visual novels for over 10 years now. It's been fascinating to see the transition of visual novels mostly being fan translations to the almost complete opposite, official visual novel translation publishers being the majority of English visual novel translation releases. It's possible when buying a visual novel on Steam or something, you might recognize these translation publisher names, or you may have gotten a visual novel and have no idea who translated it. I want to make a documentary-like retrospective series covering some of the history of these official English translation publishers with facts and trivia that may interest you. In this video, I'm going to be covering Shiravune. Huge thanks to the local weeb for doing the editing for this retrospective. Shiravune is one of the latest visual novel publishers who only got their first visual novel releases at the beginning of 2020. However, since then they've released visual novel translations quite frequently, with their catalog getting on par, if not higher, than various visual novel publishers who have existed long before they have. Shiravune as a visual novel translation publisher mostly sticks out by three main things. 1. The fact that their main non-Steam store is Johren. 2. The fact that they tend to announce visual novel translations on Twitter for the first time about 2 to 6 weeks before they fully release. And 3. The fact that since they are owned by DMM, the biggest Japanese-only digital visual novel store, they tend to release visual novels much more often than others and tend to get visual novels people are not expecting. When the company first started, they were actually first known as Shiravune. I assume this was a very direct way of showing the company would focus more on visual novels. About a year or so after their first visual novel release, they changed their name to Shiravune, assumedly to be more of a subtle pun on the term VN. I personally preferred the Shiravune name, but hey, this ain't my company. When Shiravune first started, the visual novel translation scene wasn't in a particularly bad state. There were enough big official translation publisher names and a slew of slow but ongoing fan translations. However, there were some complaints about how many translation companies and groups followed a very similar formula. Announce a new translation, people get hyped, and hopefully the company and group would release the translation in a timely manner or at least provide consistent updates on the translation progress. However, this style of announcing has the potential downside of people waiting a long time, especially if there's little to no consistent updates, making people wonder if the project is doomed or if people just keep asking the publisher or group constantly when the translation is coming out. While the trend was dying by this point, visual novel translation Kickstarters were a big thing from their mid to late 2010s, and there were a whole bunch of those with translations people were still waiting on. It almost seems like Shiravune came out of nowhere specifically to buck some of these trends, using the method of announcing then quickly releasing shortly after. Shiravune's first real release was Marco and the Galaxy Dragon. While it isn't the most talked about visual novel in the community, on Steam it was an incredible success, getting a shit ton of positive reviews, with it being short but having incredible animated scenes. I would say Shiravune's biggest series that they tend to translate and publish is the Urawareru Mono series. As a company, they actually first started off just making a PC port of Urawareru Mono Mask of Deception and Truth, which was originally published on PS4 and Vita by Atlas. Eventually, Shiravune did the same for a PC port of Prelude to the Fallen. This series got so successful on Steam that Shiravune was the one in charge of getting the sequel spin-off that also got on PC, Monochrome Mobius. They've even been able to get to translate the strategy RPG series Dungeon Travelers by the same company, which has included DLC of the Urawareru Mono characters as well as others by the same developer. However, this most definitely is not Shiravune's only series, and going through their whole catalog would take quite a while, so I'm just only going to go through some of their more notable ones. Meteor World Actor and its sequel, Badge and Dagger, is probably one of their best-selling series where the writer and developer weren't already partnered with another visual novel publisher. Meteor World Actor series is written by the writer who does the light novel and anime series Classroom of the Elite. This visual novel was pretty popular, likely due to the fact that it is mostly adult age characters and a fun, lighthearted police mystery fantasy setting, though it's also infamous for all its routes being pretty inconclusive. A weird thing about this series is that the original Meteor World Actor was not able to get on Steam, which I'm going to assume was because one of the main heroines was a lolly, but the sequel, Badge and Dagger, was able to get on Steam, luckily, because the only two main heroines are more clearly adult age. The original Meteor World Actor is one of the few visual novels on Johren to not have DRM, more on that later. Their next series that are unique to them are visual novels developed by Marmalade. These visual novels have unable to get on Steam, so they've been stuck on the Johren store. This seems to be one of Shiravune's biggest moe brands they've obtained, as they've translated 5 visual novels from them, Primal X Hearts 1 and 2, Marshmallow All the Way Home, Study Steady 1, and its fan disc, Icha Icha Steady. I wouldn't be surprised if they got Study Steady 2 in the near future. Another one of their big name visual novels is Iwai Hime, which is an interesting one because this is a visual novel written by big mystery writer Ryukishi07. Shiravune had a pretty interesting collaboration between them and John Hooper, someone who had previously translated stuff like Root Double and the fan translation of Never 7 and I.O. This is the first of many visual novels where Shiravune published something where the writer had a previous partnership with another publisher. In this case, it'd be Ryukishi07's When They Cry series, Higurashi and Umineko by Manga Gamer. Nekonyan is generally known as the publisher of SME visual novels such as Fureraba, Making Lovers, and Sugar Style. Apparently at one point, SME gave them the option to localize and translate Harem Kingdom, but Nekonyan passed on it, assumedly because they were busy at the time. Shiravune took up SME's offer privately, with them later publicly announcing that they would be the ones translating Harem Kingdom, which definitely was a big surprise at the time. Another Shiravune huge surprise was when they announced that they would be translating Alisoft's DohnaDohna, which was only able to get on Johren. Manga Gamer at that point had been the sole visual novel publisher to translate visual novels by Alisoft, which includes the whole Rant series and Eve Nicole 1. Either way, Shiravune getting DohnaDohna was definitely a huge and pleasant surprise for many people, since they loved the art style, but thought the visual novel would never come out in English, considering Manga Gamer had been taking a while to finish the rest of the Rant series and couldn't even get Eve Nicole 2 themselves. Kind of a minor surprise, but Shiravune had been able to get Purplesoft's Kunado Chronicles. This is only a minor surprise because Purplesoft at that point had kinda opened their legs to many visual novel publishers at that point, including Manga Gamer having Happy Mayor, Sekai Project having Chrono Clock and Amatsutsumi, and Nekonyan having Aoi Tori. Their latest and possibly greatest at the time of this video is Shiravune being able to get Krupo's Nukitashi. This was originally going to be translated and released by Soul Press before the CEO got in trouble for not paying taxes and other people. Nukitashi is particularly notable because this is a very popular newer visual novel in Japan that many people were looking forward to. Many people were worried that this would be one of Soul Press's cancelled translations that would never come out, but Shiravune was even able to straight up buy the Soul Press translation as confirmed by the original translator. A few other notable visual novel series they've been able to get are Otome Domain, a fairly popular visual novel with a cross-dressing male-to-female, commonly known as a trap, protagonist, the remake of Dokyusei, one of the most influential dating sim-oriented visual novels on the market in the 90s in Japan, and a whole bunch of visual novels by Debenasu Works. Now that I've talked about many of the notable visual novel titles Shiravune has translated and picked up, I want to talk about Shiravune's translators and general social media presence. Surprisingly, unlike many visual novel publishers, where many of the translators are contractors and are very vocal on social media about the projects they work on, many of Shiravune's translators either choose to not be credited or they're just very low-key and don't really post much. Another thing that Shiravune tends to do is hire third-party translation agencies to help complete their translations for them. An example for this is the Meteor World Actor series. The only big name as far as social media presence goes is Robert K, who's basically the one in charge of Shiravune's social media page, as well as being the one to take in any bug reports or fixes that people report on the Shiravune Discord. So I've talked about many of Shiravune's general positives, but for the sake of fairness, I'm going to talk about some controversies related to them. The first and most notable one is the fact that they use Johren as their only non-Steam store. So if you're not a fan of using Steam and you like to go on non-DRM stores such as Jast, Manga Gamer, or GOG, then you're out of luck because Johren is all they have, and a handful of their visual novels, like the Marmalade ones, are stuck on Johren. A bunch of people on Twitter, including representatives from Manga Gamer and Jast, have publicly asked to get Shiravune visual novels on non-Johren stores to no avail. The Johren store itself is full of controversy. One of the main issues starting out is the fact that some people used to have issues getting their credit card to be accepted when attempting to pay directly for visual novels because of outdated 3D secure. Thankfully, this appears to be much less common, but this was an issue that was around longer than it needed to be. To give credit to Johren as a store, they do have this credits or coin system that they have as a way to promote ways to save money in the long term. By buying coins ahead of time, you can use them as an in-store credit later on when buying visual novels. These coins go on sale pretty often, so you're essentially pre-ordering credit for buying future visual novels at a cheaper price. There's also an option to use PayPal if you use a site called OffGamers to purchase points separately on there. Unfortunately, while these two features are nice, this does lead to a flaw that these nice features are actually not immediately obvious that they're good features unless you're already a huge fan of the store. It doesn't help that Johren's site design is very busy. Personal problem that I have is the fact that Johren doubles as both a mobile gacha game store and a visual novel store. By doing this, they clearly tend to prioritize advertising their mobile games up in front, where visual novels are stuck in a small little section what they like to call premium games. This way of advertisement outside of Twitter is a little bit frustrating to deal with. It's honestly a lot easier for me personally to find certain titles by just going to VNDB and finding a direct Johren link in a releases page. But what's likely the biggest point of contention on Johren is the fact that they have something called DRM, or Digital Rights Management. Basically, the idea is once you have bought and downloaded the visual novel you want, when opening it for the first time, you have to enter in a one-time code to confirm that you are the proper owner of that visual novel, and only then can you actually start reading it. This idea makes sense in theory, but there's 3 potential issues with this. One is that you need an internet connection, so if you're somehow able to get the game, but then you decide to disconnect from the internet, you're stuck able to enter your code to read the visual novel you just got. The second issue is that you actually only have 3 codes you can enter per visual novel, which means you can only put your visual novel on 3 different devices. The third issue is when you do run out of devices, Johren support is apparently incredibly hit or miss on getting back to the user on revoking codes. If they don't get back to you, you're basically indirectly told to make a new account, rebuying the visual novel to get more codes. People have been able to find ways to manually revoke their own codes themselves by entering in a command in the file while connected to the internet. A pretty nice workaround, but something like this should not be this frustrating to work with in the first place. It's basically penalizing the user for properly purchasing a visual novel while not being particularly penalizing to the pirates they're trying to prevent from breaking their DRM. Trust me, pirates in the visual novel scene will find a way to break any DRM. Outside of Johren, there have been a few translation-related controversies. Shiravune tends to operate on a policy of never putting honorifics in the text, either completely removing them or localizing them into something else. Outside the most die-hard honorific fans, it seems to not bother people too much. However, there was one title, Kamiyaba, where a certain localization choice definitely bothered enough people. There's a character named Mao, the cousin of the main character, who tended to call him Oni-chan in Japanese. However, in the Shiravune translation, this was localized as Bubby, which is apparently slang that's used in the American Midwest. The complaint is while that slang may make sense to people who live in that area, if you don't live there, it's not going to make any sense at all, and it just sounds weird to the point people actually created a patch to replace all cases of this conversation to just say Oni-chan instead, among other localizations. The release of Kunado Chronicles mostly went well, except there were some users that found out that some features were in the original Japanese version, but not in the English translated version. Some examples include things like animated backgrounds being missing and slightly animated sprites being missing as well, in addition to basic things like a text skip button, a hide UI option, among other things. This caused people to make a fuss on various places, including public Steam reviews. The likely main reason for this was that the visual novels was ported to the Kirikiri engine, which I assume was to make it easier to make an 18+ patch for, because Purplesoft visual novels tend to use this CMVS engine, which is kind of weird by default. Shiravune did make a patch to bring back some of these basic issues people complain about, like being able to hide the button UI, as well as a manual skip button. However, the other flaw that's for some users harder to forgive is the fact that the lack of these features wasn't openly talked about on social media. The only place where these lack of features was even hinted at was one post by Robert K on the Shiravune Discord making a small comment on how the visual novel was being ported to Kirikiri. Your Diary Plus originally had a Steam release by Hobbybox. Unfortunately, this was one of the most blatant cases of barely edited machine translation for a fairly popular visual novel from Japan. Back in 2019, before Shiravune even released their first visual novel, they low-key announced that they would be doing a non-machine retranslation of Your Diary Plus. There's even a release roadmap set. It even says something when the Steam page itself had a disclaimer that says the Steam release is in quote-unquote very poor state right now and will be quote-unquote taking a long time. Sadly, the last update was back in September 2020, which was literally no news. Given how many visual novels Shiravune has released since then, including visual novels from Cube's sister companies like Ninkiseiyu and Kamiyaba, many fans who were looking forward to this retranslation, me included, basically given up on it coming out. But I guess it is Shiravune, so there is always that low chance of a surprise. Finally, a potentially minor thing, but likely due to being owned by DMM and being based in Japan, all Shiravune published visual novels never have unpixelated H scenes. This is due to the fact that in Japan, there are laws where lower genitals in pornographic media have to be censored for whatever reason, and eroge usually goes for using pixels for that censorship. So every original visual novel released in Japan always have pixelated H scenes, but if English publishers are lucky, they may be able to make their English releases not have pixels at all in their H scenes. Some visual novel publishers like Sekai Project and Nekonian are able to have unpixelated H-scenes depending on the company they're partnered with. Manga Gamer and Jast make it a point to only have unpixelated H-scenes, even if they have to hire someone to edit the CGs to unpixelate them like Manga Gamer, or make it a point to only work with companies that let them use the original uncensored CGs like Jast. The potential upside of Shiravune always having pixelated H-scenes likely makes it easier to get licenses and help get more visual novels released faster. However, if you're a diehard fan of uncensored, unpixelated H-scenes, you're most likely going to make it a point to boycott Shiravune releases. Shiravune isn't the perfect visual novel translation publisher, but I would overall actually put them in my personal top 3 favorites. I mostly like their style of how often they announce new visual novel translations and release them in a timely manner. I've personally gotten tired of the old school announcement style of announcing a translation 1 to 10 years before it actually releases and posting translation percentages once in a blue moon. Those weekly translation threads on 4chan and Reddit just basically give people a false sense of hopium in my opinion. With Shiravune only announcing translations with things that are basically close to done, we don't have to worry about cancellations, big delays, or people constantly begging when the translation is going to be done. Shiravune has also never done a single Kickstarter, which to be fair is something companies haven't really done since 2020, which is when Shiravune eventually started as a company. It does mean that there's sadly never going to be any official physical English versions of Shiravune published visual novels, and no way to use Kickstarters to guarantee fan discs or anything, but I usually don't get physical versions of PC visual novels anyway. Outside of the weird Bubby translation, I've been fine with Shiravune's translations. I'm pretty neutral on the usage of honorifics, so I don't mind them not being written down in text, and whenever it's localized, it's usually done well enough, though sometimes their translators can go a bit far on the dad jokes. I, for the most part, don't mind Johren being Shiravune's main non-Steam store. Johren at least has the coin discount system to make it stand out. That said, before I give Johren my full seal of approval, I prefer if they at least make their site easier to navigate to find visual novels. If they don't plan on removing their DRM policy, at least make the actual purchasing of visual novels easier, with more forgiving payment processing and an easier way to find PayPal through off-gamers. Lastly, if they're going to keep their limited 3 codes per visual novel policy, at least make Johren support actually properly revoke codes in a timely manner without using workaround or forcing you to make a new account to buy the visual novel again. I guess that makes me biased, but it says something when a Shiravune published visual novel was the first time I made a visual novel video review on my channel, Meteor World Actor. Shiravune was also the first and currently only company to offer me a free review copy of a visual novel that I actually wanted to read and review in Kunado Chronicles. I've even volunteered to be a moderator on Shiravune's Discord, that I mostly drop in to delete and ban spammers. Every month, I always look forward to Shiravune's newest visual novel announcement, Bombshell, on Twitter, and I hope they continue this exciting model going forward.